American West, legends were born in blood and gunsmoke. But this story? This is about a bandit who never fired a shot, a robber who apologized to his victims, a poet who terrorized Wells Fargo with nothing but good manners and an empty shotgun. This is the extraordinary true story of Charles Earl Bowles, better known as Black Bart, the gentleman robber who pulled off 28 heists without ever riding a horse, wrote poetry about his crimes, and lived a double life that fooled all of San Francisco society. Before he became the West's most notorious gentleman bandit, Charles Earl Bowles was just another young man with dreams of a better life. Born in New York in 1829 to English immigrants, Bowles grew up learning the value of hard work and proper manners, two traits that would oddly define his criminal career. But the quiet life of farming wasn't enough for young Charles. Like many men of his generation, he was drawn to adventure. When gold was discovered in California in 1848, the news spread like wildfire across the nation. But Charles had responsibilities, a wife, Mary, and 3 young daughters. Then came the Civil War. Bowles enlisted in the Union Army's 116th Illinois Regiment. He fought alongside General William Tecumseh Sherman in the famous March to the Sea, showing the first glimpses of the determination that would later make him infamous. The war changed men. It taught them about strategy, about survival, about the thin line between right and wrong. For Charles Bowles, it was an education in how quickly the world could transform from civilization to chaos and back again. After the war, the call of gold became too strong to resist. Bowles said goodbye to his family in Illinois, promising to return rich from the California gold fields. It was a promise he would struggle to keep. For years, Bowles worked the claims, moving from strike to strike. But the gold seemed to mock him, always just out of reach. He watched as others struck it rich while he barely scraped by. His letters home became less frequent, the dream of returning a wealthy man fading with each passing season. In those lonely nights in the mining camps, something began to change in Charles Bowles. He saw the Wells Fargo stagecoaches rolling by, heavy with other men's gold. He noticed their routes, their schedules, their vulnerabilities, and slowly, an idea began to form. But Charles Bowles wasn't going to be just another desperate bandit. No. He had observed the gentlemen of San Francisco society. He had learned their manners, their way of speaking, their style of dress. If he was going to be a robber, he would be something entirely new, a gentleman bandit. On July 26, 1875, near the small mining town of Copperopolis, California, a Wells Fargo stagecoach driver saw something strange through the dust. A figure standing in the road, wearing a long linen duster and a flour sack mask with perfectly cut eye holes.
Please throw down the box, sir. I am sorry to trouble you, but business is business.
The driver would later report that the robber was unfailingly polite, almost apologetic. He stood ramrod straight, spoke with perfect grammar, and handled his shotgun like a gentleman holding a teacup. This was the birth of Black Bart. The story of the polite bandit spread quickly. Wells Fargo offered rewards, but witnesses could only describe a medium-sized man with gray hair who spoke like a professor and vanished into the wilderness on foot. But the most brilliant part of Black Bart's scheme was hiding in plain sight. Between robberies, he lived openly in San Francisco as Charles Bolton, a successful mining engineer. He stayed at the finest hotels, wore custom-made suits, and maintained a small but elegant apartment. He told anyone who would listen about his successful mining investments, and San Francisco society welcomed him as one of their own. Meanwhile, Black Bart was becoming a legend. Over the next 8 years, he would rob 28 stagecoaches across Northern California. His technique never varied, always alone, always on foot, always polite. But it was his poetry that captured the public's imagination. After some robberies, he would leave poems signed Black Bart, the P.O.8, a play on the word poet. His most famous verse was found nailed to a tree after a robbery near Copperopolis. Here I lay me down to sleep, to wait the coming morrow, perhaps success, perhaps defeat, and everlasting sorrow. Let come what will, I'll try it on, my condition can't be worse. And if there's money in that box, this money in my purse. What made Black Bart unique wasn't just his poetry or his manners, it was his methods. Unlike other bandits of his era, he never rode a horse during his robberies. In fact, it was later revealed that he was terrified of horses. Instead, he would study the stagecoach routes carefully, choosing locations where the horses would have to slow down. He would appear suddenly from behind rocks or trees, his shotgun leveled at the driver. His routine was always the same. 1. He would step out, shotgun raised. 2. Politely request the driver throw down the strongbox. 3. Thank the passengers and apologize for the inconvenience. 4. Disappear into the wilderness on foot. What nobody knew at the time was that his shotgun was never loaded. He considered it ungentlemanly to risk actually shooting someone. His success relied entirely on his commanding presence and reputation. For 8 years, Black Bart outwitted the best detectives Wells Fargo could hire. He never worked with accomplices who might betray him. He never got greedy, spacing his robberies months apart. And he never broke his code of conduct. No violence, no crude behavior, no targeting of passengers. The company spent fortune trying to catch him. They posted rewards, hired extra guards, changed routes. But Black Bart seemed to always be one step ahead. Some began to wonder if he had informants inside Wells Fargo itself. Meanwhile, Charles Bolton continued his life in San Francisco. He attended theater performances, dined at the finest restaurants, and even invested in mining companies, sometimes using the very money he had stolen from their shipments. But even the most careful criminals eventually make a mistake. For Black Bart, it came on November 3rd, 1883, during what would be his final robbery. The location was perfect, a narrow pass near Copperopolis. The stagecoach was carrying a valuable Wells Fargo shipment. Everything went according to plan, until this time, the driver had armed guards hidden inside the coach. When they jumped out, guns blazing, Black Bart was forced to flee in a panic. In his haste, he dropped something that would prove to be his undoing, a handkerchief. A simple white handkerchief, but it had been laundered in San Francisco and was marked with a laundry tag, FX07. Enter James B. Hume, Wells Fargo's chief detective. Hume was a methodical investigator who had been chasing Black Bart for years. Now, finally, he had a solid clue. For weeks, Hume visited every laundry in San Francisco, showing them the handkerchief. Finally, at a small shop on Bush Street, he found a match. The laundry's records showed that FX07 belonged to a Charles Bolton, who lived in a fashionable boarding house on Webb Street. Hume began watching Bolton. The more he observed, the more things added up. The distinguished gentleman matched the physical description of Black Bart. He disappeared from the city during the times of the robberies. And most tellingly, he seemed to have no visible means of income despite his expensive lifestyle. On November 20th, 1883, Hume and his deputies surrounded Bolton's boarding house. When they knocked on his door, they found him calmly getting dressed for dinner.
Mr. Bolton, or should I say, Mr. Bowles, perhaps you know why we're here.
I am Black Bart. The poetry is done.
Even in arrest, he maintained his dignity and manners. He surrendered without resistance, asking only to be allowed to finish dressing before being taken to jail. The trial of Black Bart, sensation. San Francisco society ladies packed the courtroom to catch a glimpse of the gentleman bandit. Many couldn't believe that the refined Charles Bolton was the notorious Black Bart. The evidence was overwhelming. Wells Fargo had recovered several of his poems. Witnesses identified him. And most damaging, they found a Bible in his room with his real name, Charles E. Bowles, written inside. Bart was sentenced to 6 years in San Quentin prison, but served only 4 years due to good behavior. Even in prison, he maintained his gentleman's demeanor, working as a prison librarian and pharmacy clerk. Released in January 1888, Black Bart vanished completely. Wells Fargo kept him under surveillance for a while, but eventually lost track of him. Some say he returned to his family in the East. Others believe he continued robbing stages under a different name. The last confirmed sighting of Charles Bowles was in February 1888. A reporter tracked him down at the Nevada house in San Francisco. The legend of Black Bart lives on as one of the most unusual stories of the American West. He proved that not all criminals were violent desperados, that sometimes the most successful robberies were committed with courtesy rather than cruelty. But perhaps the greatest lesson from Black Bart's story is that sometimes the most interesting criminals aren't the violent ones, but those who do it with style. In an era of brutal bandits and desperate outlaws, Black Bart proved that even crime could be committed with class.